200 years of violence, poverty,
Shame.
shame, feuds, 200 years of that. And our county was actually formed because of the cattle wars. And after we were added as a county, not long after that, we were so violent, the state of Kentucky didn't know what to do with us, so they tried to disband us and make us part of something else. And that didn't work too well, and people were Scotch-Irish people. They were hard-nosed, rugged individuals. And as a matter of fact, when they came across Cumberland Gap, which a lot of people came into this part of the country with Daniel Boone and Dr. Thomas Walker, when they got here, they could have gone on up into central Kentucky and got a really good piece of property. But they knew that eventually there was going to be government there was going to be rule and order because it was on the Kentucky River. And so they chose, a lot of them, to stay here because it was rural, rugged, and in their minds, I think they thought nobody's going to mess with them. And so we couldn't get along with anybody. And then if something bad began to happen, moonshining, marijuana, pills, I mean, just meth, anything, we just got right in the middle of that. And the family hated families. And, you know, you were rugged, independent, guys don't cry, you play hurt, all that kind of stuff. And over a 200-year period, we just got worse and worse and worse. But it was just so bad, and so it was almost like every day you walk outside and it's just like on a cloudy day, it's just dark. I mean, it's just, and people were dying and people were coming, and they were saying to the churches, they were saying, you know, we have got people, our kids are on drugs, we're spending all of our money, they're dying, and the families were in worse shape than the drug addicts, because they were living the reality of this thing 24 hours a day, and at least the addicts were taking something to medicate themselves. And I mean, it was just hopeless. And then we didn't know, as a church, we didn't know what to do to help them. But the truth is, we've just had a really tough time here. Major poverty, and people are just, not educated and don't seem to want to be. And the welfare is, welfare might have seemed like a good thing, but it's just destroyed the work ethic. And so that's where we've been up till a few years ago, when God came to town and began to change things. But when we got really desperate, people started coming and they started crying out to God. And I mean, we had no hope. There was nothing we could do. It was at the end. And I mean, like we said many times, there's not going to be a next generation of Manchester. It's going to be over with. Everybody was leaving. And the ones that were staying, half of them were dying. It was just a really bad situation. And we thought we were losing one a week. We found out later we were probably losing 2 or 3 a week in our town, because they were dying from car wrecks, or they were having seizures and dying, and nobody was saying that was from drugs. And so that's the desperation and beginning to pray. And we got up right before we marched. Sometimes we'd have 100, 150 people come on Saturday morning to pray. And just from all different walks of life, every church background, it would just come. I mean, we even had people that weren't Christians came to the prayer meeting sometimes, just because they were looking for some kind of help.
It wasn't any theology. There was nobody said, I'm a Baptist, we do this, what do you all do as a charismatic, or what do you do as a Presbyterian? People would come and they'd say, I heard you did, your child was having problems with drugs or alcohol, and how do you do that? And it became out of circles of desperation. You can't expect the government to come in and cure all your ills, because that's a pipe dream. We already know that, and we all knew in our heart that the only real answer was God.
The Bible says, that we're to be one. Jesus prayed that prayer. But we would have never been one here just because the Bible said it. It took something like drugs that everybody, you could walk in at that time into any church in Clay County, and we have well over 100 churches. You say, how many of you have somebody in the immediate family that's on drugs? And 95% of the people would raise their hands. Mm-hmm. And that drug, that sin, brought us together. Operation Unite that we've talked about some, they had started up, and they were a government program, and they were really trying to help. Congressman Rogers was really trying to help, but they didn't have a clue, and they were trying to do government stuff. We invited them to come and march with us. And they came, and Karen will tell you that, Karen Engel, the director, that, okay, I'm going to go to Manchester, be a couple hundred folks show up. It'll be a good start. Maybe we can help them.
Because they were desperate to do something.
And they were coming to help us. And she said as she was marching, she realized the church is the key to everything. And that was the beginning. And later, they had 40-something undercover cops, and of course we were threatened and all those things, you know, about marching. And we didn't know this for several years, but I was in a meeting with a policeman one time, and one of the guys said, Doug, we marched with you in the march. I said, we knew you were threatened. And I said, I didn't know you marched. I didn't see any of you. He said, duh, that's the idea. We were undercover, you know, and they marched with us. And so as all of that stuff began to happen, God just showed up, I mean, in a miraculous way. And Ken and I, Ken Boland, we just decided that, listen, not only is Ken a Southern Baptist, he's a Calvinist. And I don't know what I am, but I'm not one of them. And so we decided that we were going to focus on Jesus and our problems. And we have traveled literally all over America together, and we discuss things, but we've never got loud. I preach in his church, he does mine. As a matter of fact, I think my folks like him better than, I trust him, you know, and that's what's happened. All of a sudden, the pastors started working together. We realized we liked each other. You know, we don't have a problem praying out loud, you know, our church, but people that never did that before, man, are just on their knees and they're crying out to God. All of a sudden, you know, you're hugging a Presbyterian, for God's sake, you know, or a Methodist or somebody. And then one day, a little Methodist guy that's not here anymore, that looked like Mr. Rogers. You know what Mr. Rogers looked like? All he needed was a little sweater and the song. And just a meek, good man got up and he said, we need to pray this morning for God to expose the darkness. And just bold and strong. And we prayed that morning, and about 2 weeks later, less than 2 weeks later, the FBI shows up and makes the first drug bust, the major drug bust with the big guys. You know, the county court clerk, the money lender, some of the big dealers. But it was like, you know, it wasn't just good enough to come to church anymore. You know, like Ken Boland he'll have to tell you, had this dramatic encounter with a woman in his church that died on Christmas Eve, was it, or New Year's Eve, and Christmas Eve. And the family had no Christmas present. She'd froze to death. The mama had walking from the drug dealer's house. The kids were devastated. You know, and Ken said, I can't pastor this religious stuff anymore. I've got to be different. And just multiply time after time just all over our county. And not just our county, but really all over the mountains of eastern Kentucky.